I used to think my life was built on solid ground. It wasn't a palace, mind you, nothing so grand. It was more like a warm, well lit house that I had spent years carefully constructing, brick by brick, memory by memory. The sound of my husband Liam's keys in the door at exactly 6:15. The way my daughter Sophie would hum when she colored, her small tongue peeking out in concentration. The familiar weight of our old dog, Barnaby, sleeping at my feet while I worked from my home office. This was my everything. This was the world I had built, and I loved it with a ferocity that was sometimes quiet, sometimes overwhelming, but always present. And the cornerstone of this entire structure, the one thing I believed kept the walls standing, was that I was the calm one, the steady one, the one who didn't make waves. This wasn't an accident. It was a learned skill, a defense mechanism forged in the fire of my own childhood. My father was a brilliant, volatile man. His moods were like weather systems you couldn't predict. Sunny and generous one moment, a thunderous hurricane the next. The rule in our house was simple: don't upset your father. Don't disagree. Don't ask difficult questions. Don't have an opinion that might clash with his. The key to a peaceful dinner, to a quiet evening, to survival was silence. I learned to read the room the moment he walked in. I learned to fold my feelings into tiny, neat squares and tuck them away in a drawer no one could see. Silence was safety. Silence was peace. I carried this lesson into my adult life like a secret handbook. In my marriage, it manifested as avoidance, a slight tension over a forgotten chore. I just do it myself, quietly. A disagreement about finances. I'll defer to Liam's judgment. It wasn't that I didn't have opinions. I had a whole symphony of them playing in my head. But the fear of conflict, the visceral, childhood deep terror of unleashing a storm, was a muzzle I placed on myself every single day. I confused my silence for strength, for being the mature one who kept the peace. I thought I was the glue. The crack that would eventually split my world open started so small. It was an email. I had borrowed Liam's laptop to look up a recipe because my phone was charging. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen from someone named A. The preview text read, "Can't stop thinking about last night. Your..." The message disappeared, but the words were seared onto my retinas. My blood turned to ice. Then, just as quickly, it turned to fire. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. This wasn't a slight tension. This wasn't a forgotten chore. This was an earthquake, and the ground beneath my feet was turning to liquid. But then, the old programming kicked in. Don't cause a scene. Don't confront. What if you're wrong? What if you misunderstood? The voice in my head was my mother's, soothing, placating. Just wait. It might be nothing. You'll just look paranoid and crazy. So, when Liam came home that evening, whistling, dropping a kiss on my head, like always, I said nothing. I served the dinner that I'd made, the one I'd looked up the recipe for on his computer. My hand trembled as I passed him the salt. He smiled at me. It looked the same. It felt like a lie. Days passed. The email became a ghost haunting my every moment. I'd look at him across the breakfast table and see a stranger. I'd listen to him talk about his day, about a funny thing his coworker said, and all I could think was, is that A? Is she the funny coworker? The silence I was keeping wasn't peaceful anymore. It was a screaming, howling vacuum inside me. It was a poison I was drinking myself thinking it would kill him. I started looking for evidence. I became a detective in my own home, a role I despised but felt compelled to play. I checked his phone when he was in the shower. The password was still our anniversary. A small, pathetic part of me saw that as a sign of hope. I scoured his social media, his emails when I got the chance. I found nothing. The single email was a phantom, but its damage was real. It was changing me. The trust, that fragile, invisible thread that holds two people together, was fraying, and I was the one silently, secretly pulling on the string. The opportunity to speak came on a Thursday. We were in the kitchen loading the dishwasher, a normal, mundane moment. Sophie was drawing at the table. Sunlight was streaming through the window. It was a picture of the life I thought we had. He bumped my hip playfully. "You've been quiet lately. Everything okay?" My breath caught in my throat. This was it. The opening, the moment to be brave, to say, actually, no. I saw an email. Who is A? 3 sentences. That's all it would have taken to change the entire trajectory of our lives. I looked at him. I saw the man I loved, and I saw the potential storm in his eyes if I accused him. The conflict, the shouting, the end of my beautiful, quiet house. I forced a smile. It felt like a crack in my face. I said, "I'm fine, just tired. Work's been busy." I stayed silent. I chose the familiar prison of my fear over the uncertain freedom of the truth. And in doing so, I handed over the wrecking ball that would demolish my world. I just didn't know I was about to swing it myself. Silence is not empty. It's filled with the echoes of the words you didn't say. In the weeks that followed my decision to swallow the truth, my world became a cacophony of those echoes. The email was a seed of doubt, and I had watered it with my fear, letting it grow into a thick, choking vine that wrapped itself around every thought, every interaction. I became a ghost in my own home. I moved through the rooms, performing the rituals of our life, making coffee, packing Sophie's lunch, kissing Liam goodbye. But I was no longer present. I was a spectator, watching a play I no longer believed in, waiting for an actor to miss his mark. My mind was a prison, and the only 2 inmates were suspicion and dread. I started cataloging every tiny shift in his behavior, assigning them the worst possible meaning. Him working late was no longer just him working late. It was a clandestine meeting. A new shirt wasn't a new shirt. It was an attempt to impress someone. When he was on his phone, smiling at a text, my stomach would clench into a cold, hard knot. I'd casually ask, "Who's that?" trying to sound light, but the question always landed with the subtlety of a hammer. "Just Mark from work," he'd say, or "Your mom sends a funny meme of a cat." And I'd nod, but I didn't believe him. I couldn't. The trust was gone, and I was the one who had killed it, not with an accusation, but with the silent, corrosive acid of my unspoken fear. The tension was a physical presence in our house. Liam felt it. How could he not? The air was thick with it. He started tiptoeing around me, his cheerful whistling replaced by a cautious quiet. He'd look at me with confused, concerned eyes.
"Are you sure you're okay?" he asked again one night, his hand on my arm. "You feel a million miles away." The touch, which once felt like home, now felt like a brand. I flinched. I saw the hurt flash in his eyes, and a part of me screamed to just say it, to end the agonizing charade. But the louder, more terrified part won. The part that was still a little girl, terrified of her father's rage. "I'm just stressed," I muttered, pulling away. "A big project deadline. It'll pass." It was a lie, and we both knew it wasn't the whole truth. I was pushing him away. I was creating the very distance I was so afraid of finding. In my desperate attempt to hold on to my life, I was dismantling it, brick by brick, with my own hands. The breaking point, the true crack that shattered the entire wall, came on a rainy Tuesday. I was supposed to be at a dentist appointment across town, but it had been canceled, and I found myself with 2 unexpected free hours. Instead of going home, an impulse, a dark curiosity, pulled me toward Liam's office. I parked across the street from the sleek glass building where he worked, the wipers swishing back and forth, keeping time with my frantic heartbeat. I told myself I was just there to surprise him, to maybe grab a coffee together like we used to. But I was lying to myself. I was there to watch. I didn't have to wait long. At noon, he walked out of the main doors laughing. Not his usual reserved work laugh. This was a full, open mouth, head thrown back laugh. And he wasn't alone. A woman was with him. She had dark curly hair and was wearing a bright red coat. She said something, and he laughed again, touching her arm lightly. That was it, a laugh and a touch on the arm. In any other context, it would have been nothing, innocent. But viewed through the distorted lens of my paranoia, it was a confession. It was proof. The Phantom A had a face and a red coat. I sat there in my car, the rain blurring the world outside, my hands frozen on the steering wheel. I felt numb. The fiery, screaming anxiety quieted, replaced by a cold, certain despair. I had my answer, and yet I still said nothing. I drove home, the silence in the car now a tomb. I had looked directly into the crack, seeing the rotten foundation beneath, and my only response was to carefully, quietly close the door. When Liam came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark. The remains of a dinner I couldn't eat were on a plate in front of me. "Hey, why are you sitting in the dark?" he asked, flipping the switch. The sudden light felt like an interrogation. I looked at him. I saw the man I had spied on, the man who laughed so freely with the woman in a red coat. The words were right there, a tidal wave behind my lips. "I saw you," but what came out was a whisper. "We need to talk." He stilled, his keys halfway to the hook. The air in the room shifted. He knew. He could feel the weight of what was coming. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down, his eyes never leaving my face. "Okay," he said, his voice careful, neutral. "Talk." I took a breath that felt like it was made of shards of glass. This was it, the moment to speak. But the lifetime of conditioning, the terror of the storm, was too strong. I couldn't voice my suspicion. I couldn't name my fear. So I didn't talk about the email. I didn't talk about the red coat. I talked around it. I unleashed all the pent-up, misdirected anxiety of the last few months. "I feel like we're drifting apart," I began, my voice trembling. "You're always distracted. You're never here anymore. I feel so alone in this marriage." It was all true, but it was the symptom, not the disease. I was accusing him of the atmosphere I had created. His face, which had been braced for a specific blow, now just looked confused and weary. Where is this coming from? I'm right here. You're the one who's been a million miles away for weeks. I'd try to talk to you, and you shut down. What do you want from me? And in that moment, I had a choice to be precise, to be brave, to say, I want to know who A is. I want to know why you were laughing with the woman in a red coat. But his defensiveness felt like the first rumbles of the storm I dreaded. So I retreated. I folded. I need you to try harder, I whispered, the fight gone out of me. The disappointment on his face was a physical blow. He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. I don't even know what that means, he said, his voice flat and cold. I can't fight a ghost, Sarah. And he walked out of the room. I had finally spoken, but I had said all the wrong things. I had chosen to fight a shadow, and in doing so, I had made everything infinitely, tragically worse. The crack was now a chasm, and we were standing on opposite sides.
The fight that wasn't a fight left a nuclear winter in its wake. The quiet in our house was no longer just the absence of sound. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Liam and I became experts in avoidance, orbiting each other in the same space, careful never to collide. We spoke in polite, functional sentences. Did you pay the electricity bill? Sophie has a dentist appointment on Thursday. Our home, once filled with humming and laughter and the easy clutter of a shared life, was now a museum of what used to be. I was drowning in the silence I had created, and in a final, desperate attempt to gasp for air, I did the one thing I swore I wouldn't. I decided to hunt for proof. Not the phantom proof of a laugh or a touch, but concrete, undeniable evidence. I needed it to justify my own torment, to validate the months of silent suffering. I needed to be right, because the alternative, that I had destroyed my marriage over a misunderstanding, was too terrifying to consider. The opportunity came on a Saturday. Liam had taken Sophie to the park, a deliberate act of normalcy that felt anything but. Barnaby was snoring at my feet. The house was silent, but this time the silence was a command. It was time to look. My heart was a wild drum against my ribs as I walked into his home office. I went straight for the old laptop he used for personal things, tucked away in a drawer. I typed in our anniversary date with trembling fingers. The login failed. My blood ran cold. I tried again. Failed. He had changed it. That simple act felt like a confession louder than any I could have imagined. A righteous, furious anger began to boil inside me, scalding away the fear. How dare he lock me out? What is he hiding? I rifled through the drawer, my movements frantic, receipts, old cables, a broken watch. And then my fingers brushed against cold, hard plastic. A phone. An old work phone from his last job, one he was supposed to have returned. It was dead, of course. I scrambled for a charger, my hands shaking so badly I could barely plug it in. I sat on the floor, my back against his desk, watching the dark screen as if my life depended on it. The screen lit up. The phone whirred to life. And after what felt like an eternity, it finished loading. There were no security codes on this one. It was a relic, a time capsule of his carelessness. I went straight to the messages. My vision blurred, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. And there it was, the thread with Alicia. I started reading. The world narrowed to the glowing screen in my hands. The messages started months ago, work-related at first. Then, slowly, they shifted. Inside jokes, compliments. You're the only one who gets me here. Wish you were having a drink with us. Then, the one I had seen a preview of. Can't stop thinking about last night. You're incredible.
And Liam's replies, they weren't overtly sexual, but they were intimate. They were the conversations he should have been having with me. He was sharing his frustrations, his dreams, his daily annoyances with her. He was being seen by her. The emotional betrayal was a sharper, more profound wound than any physical one could have been. He had given her the part of him I had been begging for, his attention, his vulnerability. The final message in the thread was from 2 days ago, from Alicia. It read, "I can't do this sneaking around anymore. It's not fair to anyone. I'm sorry." He hadn't replied. I dropped the phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor. The sound was impossibly loud in the silent house. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there on the floor, curled into a ball, the cold from the wood seeping into my bones. I had my proof. I was right. And the victory was the most hollow, devastating feeling I have ever known. I heard the front door open. Sophie's cheerful voice echoed in the hallway. "Daddy, can we have pancakes for dinner?" I didn't move. I couldn't. I heard Liam's footsteps approach the office. He stopped in the doorway. I looked up. He saw my face, pale and streaked with silent tears I hadn't even felt. He saw the old phone on the floor, its screen still glowing with his betrayal. His eyes widened, the color drained from his face. The bag of groceries he was holding slipped from his grasp and hit the floor with a sickening thud. A carton of eggs shattered, yellow yolk oozing across the wood like a metaphor for our broken life. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice strangled. All the words I had stored up for months, the accusations, the rage, the pain, evaporated. There was only one sentence left. One true, terrible sentence. I said, my voice a dead, flat thing. "You changed the password." It was the most illogical, insignificant detail to focus on, but it was the one that broke me. It was the lock on the door, the final barrier. He didn't deny it. He didn't explain. He just stood there, watching me, his own guilt a palpable force in the room. The silence between us was finally, absolutely complete. There was nothing left to say. I uncurled myself. I stood up. I walked past him, my body moving on autopilot. I walked past my confused daughter in the hallway. I walked out the front door into the cool afternoon air. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I could not be in that museum of a house for one more second. I had stayed silent when I should have spoken, and in the end, my silence had screamed so loudly it brought the entire structure crashing down. I had lost everything. And the most cruel part? I had handed him the tools to help me destroy it.
There is a silence that exists in empty rooms that is different from all others. It's not the tense silence of things left unsaid or the peaceful silence of contentment. It's a final silence, a silence that has absorbed all the sounds, all the life. It has nothing left to give back. I found that silence in a rented studio apartments on the other side of town. One room with beige walls and a window that looked out onto a brick wall. This was my new everything. The first few days were a blur of logistical nightmares and soul-crushing practicalities. Calling a lawyer, my voice a monotone recitation of facts. Packing a suitcase while Liam was at work. Moving through the house like a ghost robbing its own past. I took only what was mine, what I had owned before him. It wasn't much. The rest of my life, the photos, the shared books, the mismatched coffee mugs we'd collected on trips stayed behind. They belonged to the woman who lived in that house, and she was gone. The hardest part was Sophie, telling her that Mommy was going to be living somewhere else for a while.
Her small, confused face, the tears that welled in her eyes, that was a pain I had never conceived of. It was a physical amputation. Liam and I, in our first and only act of unity since the collapse, agreed on a story. We were having a hard time and needed space. We were protecting her from the ugly truth, but every time I dropped her off after a visit, watching her small frame walk back into the house without me, I felt like I was lying to her all over again. I had lost my title as her constant. I was now a visitor. In the emptiness of the studio, I had nothing left to distract me from the wreckage. The anger at Liam had burned itself out, leaving behind the cold gray ash of a shared failure. Yes, he had betrayed me. He had opened a door to someone else. But I was the one who had boarded up all the windows in our marriage long before. I had created a home where silence was the default language, where conflict was the ultimate enemy. I had made myself a ghost in my own life. And then I was surprised when someone else started looking for a living, breathing connection. I would lie on the single bed in that beige room and replay every moment, not just the recent ones, but the years of them. The times I'd bitten my tongue when I felt hurt, the times I said fine when I was screaming inside. I saw now that my silence wasn't peacekeeping. It was a form of cowardice. It was a slow, passive aggression. I was withholding my true self from him and then punishing him for not knowing who I was. I had handed him a map with all the important landmarks erased and then blamed him for getting lost. The loss was a physical weight. I felt it in the mornings when I woke up and didn't hear Barnaby's tail thumping against the floor. I felt it in the eerie quiet of making coffee for one. I felt it in the space beside me in the bed, a vast, cold continent of emptiness. I had lost my husband, my home, my daily life with my daughter. I had lost the future we had planned, the vacations, the holidays, the simple, mundane promise of growing old together in that house. It was all gone. The room I was in was just a concrete representation of the emptiness inside me. One afternoon, I found a box of my old things I'd stored in the back of the closet. In it was a journal from my late teens. I flipped it open, my own youthful handwriting staring back at me. And there it was, on page after page. The same pattern. Didn't tell Mom I was sad. Pretended I liked the dress Dad bought me. Said nothing when Sarah counseled on me, even though I was hurt. I had been building the foundation for this collapse my entire life. I had carried the scared little girl from my childhood straight into my marriage, and I had let her make all the big decisions. I thought about Liam, alone in our house. Was he feeling this same hollowed-out agony? Or was he feeling a guilty sense of relief? Relief that the tension was finally over, that the silent, accusing wife was gone, that he could breathe. The not knowing was its own special torture. We were two satellites that had crashed out of orbit, spinning off into separate dark voids. The lawyer told me we were proceeding with a separation agreement. The word was so sterile, so final. It made it real in a way the beige apartment hadn't. This wasn't a break. This was an end. I signed the papers at a cheap laminate desk, the scratch of the pen being the only sound in the room. I was legally dismantling my life, sentence by sentence. That night, I sat on the floor by the window, watching the light from the street lamp cast long, distorted shadows on the brick wall. I wasn't crying. I was just empty. I had spent a lifetime being afraid of losing everything, and in the end, my fear was the very thing that had guaranteed I would. I had been so busy guarding the walls of my beautiful house that I never noticed the termites I was letting feast in the foundation. My silence hadn't protected me. It had made me a collaborator in the destruction of my own world. The room was empty because I had allowed everything that filled it to be taken away piece by piece, word by unspoken word.
Time doesn't heal all wounds, not the deep ones. What it does is teach you how to live with the scar. It becomes a part of your landscape, a ridge of tough tissue you trace with your fingers in quiet moments, remembering how you bled. A year after I walked out of that house, the scar was still tender, but I was finally learning its shape. My new life had a rhythm, a different, quieter music. I saw Sophie every Wednesday and every other weekend. Our time together was intense, precious, and sometimes heartbreakingly fragile. I learned to be fully present with her in a way I never had when I was lost in the silent currents of my marriage. We built new rituals in my small apartment. Pancake Saturdays with cartoon-shaped pancakes, reading stories in a fort made of sheets. It wasn't the life I wanted for her, but it was a life filled with love, and I made sure she knew it. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. It was a bureaucratic whimper, not a bang. Signing the final papers felt like closing a heavy, sad book I'd been forced to read for far too long. There was no relief, only a profound, bone-deep acceptance. It was over. A few weeks later, I met Liam at a park to exchange Sophie. It was one of those crisp, clear autumn days where the world seems sharp and honest. We stood a few feet apart, two strangers bound by a shared history and a wonderful child. The anger was gone, leaving only a quiet sorrow. "How are you?" he asked. It wasn't a pleasantry. He was really asking. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. I saw the man I had loved, the man I had failed, the man who had failed me. I saw a person, flawed and human, just like me. "I'm learning," I said. And it was the truth. He nodded, his eyes full of a similar understanding. "I'm sorry, Sarah, for everything," he said. "I'm sorry, too," I replied. And I was. I was sorry for my part in the silence. I was sorry for the detective, for the unspoken accusations, for the fortress I built around my heart long before he ever handed me a reason to. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just stood there, in the autumn light, two people acknowledging the shared wreckage of a sunken ship. And in that moment, I felt a piece of my soul, long held captive by the past, finally slip its chains and come home.